What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Alex Wolfe from Locked On Knicks as the New York Knicks appear to be frontrunners in the pursuit of Utah Jazz star Donovan Mitchell. But at what potential cost would it take to acquire the star guard's services? Who has the most leverage in these discussions between the Utah Jazz and the New York Knicks? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net continues to be your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news covering Major League Baseball, UFC, MMA, boxing, all the fighting odds. They've got you covered for that. Golf, you name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. It's your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And right now, you can take a look at who are the odds-on favorites to win the title next season in the NBA. Right now, the Milwaukee Bucks plus 600 title favorites. Boston Celtics at plus 625. The Golden State Warriors in third place at plus 650. So not the current favorites to repeat. And then rounding out the top five, you got the LA Clippers at plus 700 and the Phoenix Suns down in fifth place at plus 750. So for all of that and more odds, head to the website today to check out all the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. The New York Knicks seem to be the apparent frontrunners to land Utah Jazz star Donovan Mitchell, but at what potential cost? Joining us now is Alex Wolfe from Locked On Knicks. You can follow on Twitter at the Alex Wolfe. Now, Alex, before we get into what a potential trade permutation looks like between the Knicks and the Jazz, as it's centered on Donovan Mitchell potentially exiting Utah, just on the surface here, who do you think has more leverage as these discussions are currently ongoing between the Utah Jazz and the New York Knicks?
At risk of getting called a homer like I do on my own channel by visiting fans, I think the Knicks have more leverage here, honestly. I don't think the Knicks are in any sort of rush to make this move, and maybe you could say the same about the Jazz. I could sort of see it from both perspectives, but I think the Knicks are less in a rush, if that makes sense. Like, they're at a point where they have young talent. They have I won't call him marquee, but a good free agent acquisition that they feel great about, that they just added in Jalen Brunson, who solves a problem at the point guard spot that they've had for forever, and is going to give them an efficient, good player at that position for the first time in 20 years. I don't know. And hopefully one that'll be with the team long-term and have long-term success there. Unlike, you could say like Derrick Rose, whatever. But anyway, to get back to the actual Mitchell topic, I think the Knicks would be happy. They would be fine going into this season without him. You know what I mean? And they would be fine going this whole season without him. And I think the Jazz might potentially run into a scenario where if they go the whole season with Donovan Mitchell, his trade value becomes less, because then he has less years that he's under contract, before reaching free agency again. A year passes, the situation I'm sure will get messier. At this point, Mitchell's been pretty civil, honestly, with this whole thing. There's been some has he, hasn't he, as far as putting in a quote unquote official trade demand or whatever. And so that, there's a lot of stuff going around about, just how forceful has he been with this whole thing and all that, as my cat says hello. But it ultimately, I think that Mitchell at any point could turn this on its head by being more forceful with I want out. And if he makes that call and decides to say I want out, then suddenly the clamps get more on the Jazz. And I think they would then have to be more inclined to make this deal faster.
Yeah, take it from somebody who was very, very close to the whole situation with the James Harden exodus here in Houston, that going into the season with a disgruntled star, somebody who, maybe doesn't want to be with the organization anymore, it hardly, if ever, works out well. Shout out to the Brooklyn Nets, who are facing a similar dilemma just down the road from the Knicks with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But when you look at what this potential, and I do think when you look at the Knicks' perspective of things, right, they kind of already feel like they're walking away winners this offseason, having picked up Jalen Brunson. So I'm inclined to agree with you there, Alex. I don't think the Knicks are under any pressure to make this deal happen for Donovan Mitchell. If it works out, great. And as far as what it would look like if it potentially works out, what to you is an appropriate, realistic amount to give up for a star player like Donovan Mitchell now that he's available?
Well, so there's been all this talk, right, about like, Ainge is thinking, Danny Ainge of the Jazz now, formerly of the Celtics, is thinking like, I need to beat the, Gobert trade package with Mitchell. To which I'm like, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not necessarily saying that the Knicks should look to be like, we need to come in way less than the Gobert package, because obviously Donovan Mitchell is a fantastic player in his own right. But as far as the roles that they played in the Jazz's success, like, I think that it's roughly equal. You know what I mean? Like, Rudy Gobert's not nothing. Like, yes, he might be limited on the offensive end, but defensively, he can single-handedly turn your team into like a top 10 defense. And that's hugely valuable in the NBA, which explains why the Timberwolves, looking at it from the perspective of like, we might be one piece away, looked at this and said, let's throw the whole boat at Utah for him, and hopefully make a run with Cat and Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell and Gobert. And so then, from the Knicks and Mitchell perspective, I think that they will probably try to beat the picks compensation, at least on the surface. And this is where like those picks come in that they got for trading out of the draft, or at least out of the first round of this year's draft, with trading 11, and through other machinations, they sent out Kemba Walker and a fistful of protected seconds and stuff like that too, to eventually get this all done. But when the dust settled, they now have two fairly heavily protected first rounders from Washington and Detroit that start this next draft in 2023, but both are so protected that they probably won't convey until at the earliest like 2025 maybe, and I think the latest that they can is like 2026 or 27. And then they have the 2025 Milwaukee pick, top 4 protected. So I think all 3 of those will go out. That gets you up to 3 first round picks, at least on the surface. They also have Dallas's 2023 pick, top 10 protected from the Kristaps Porzingis trade, which probably will convey this coming year. Then they also have obviously all of their own picks going forward. So if I was going to fathom a guess of where the pick compensation might settle in, I think they will probably say, fine, you want us to like, at least on the surface, beat what Minnesota gave you as far as just pure volume. They're not all going to be unprotected, but sure, you can have like 5 first round picks, which would be those 4 protected ones, from those various sources that I mentioned. And I would say they would probably go their own 2023 pick unprotected and say, we figure we'll probably be pretty good this year. So fine, you can have that one as well, unprotected. I think maybe then you would also get a swap or two in there, maybe like 2024, and then if Utah really presses, like 2026, which would also beat the Minnesota trade, in the sense that they gave up 4 first round picks and 1 swap, and all those picks were unprotected. But again, with Gobert on the team now, plus the core that they have, you figure they're going to be good for a while. They're taking a little bit of a risk with the unprotected thing, like 4 or 5 years down the line, but the first 2 or 3 of those shouldn't be too crazy of a risk for them. And then as far as player compensation goes, that's where it gets a little more tricky from the Knicks perspective. Like, I get the feeling maybe
If you're the Knicks, if you feel
Yeah.
like you can get away from this trade and do it without like giving up like an RJ Barrett, do you just say, you know what, we come out on top of this trade no matter what if we can hold on to RJ?
From my perspective, if they gave up, like, let's say if we're looking at it through that prism, and so then it's like, okay, so if they're just concerned with keeping RJ, then like, are they doing Obi and Quickly and Grimes and Deuce and Cam Reddish? I mean, that's a lot of players. And at that point, I would look at it and say, okay, did you just kind of do yourself a disservice? Like, I don't think any Knicks fan wants to see like the Carmelo Anthony trade all over again, where, you get a good player and are in a situation where like you could be a playoff team for a number of years with the core that you have, but your ceiling is capped by the fact that you just don't have the assets to make anything else happen. And so I don't think that Leon Rose would take a deal like that, because I think that he would look at this as like not the final move. So I think that he would want to hold on to a number of the young players, whether that means like Quentin Grimes and Obi Toppin goes out or something. One idea that I've kicked around that I would love if it happened, like, I think the time to move on from Julius Randle should be sooner than later. So perhaps you loop in a team like the Lakers that have a Russell Westbrook that they're trying to get rid of, and fill that giant salary slot with someone a little more useful. maybe you send like Julius Randle and Derrick Rose to LA, who then can send a little bit of extra pick compensation or like a Taylor Horton Tucker or something like that to Utah to kind of, juice the offer up a little more. I think there's some avenues. I don't know exactly what way they're going to go, but I would be extremely surprised if the Knicks were looking at it from the perspective of like, if we give up anyone and everyone but RJ, this is a win. Because I think that they're not looking to just have a team that's going to be like Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson now, who they re-signed, and like whoever else. And it doesn't matter. Like, I don't think they would be looking at it that way. I think they'd be looking at it as like, we don't need to make this move, so we're not going to do it unless we feel like we have flexibility going forward.
At least on the surface, if Randle does stay behind, right, and you're looking at maybe a core trio, at least on the top of maybe, Mitchell, Brunson, Randle, possibly RJ Barrett, if you manage to hold on to him without giving him up in the trade package as well. Like, how confident are you in a core of those 3 or 4 players moving forward if you're in New York? Like, what do you feel like the ceiling is, at least right away, like starting this next season with a group of those guys?
Unfortunately, I think without a mindset adjustment, Julius is sort of the odd man out there. I think that this past year was sort of telling. And look, like, he signed a big contract extension last year, after the 2021 season, and Knicks fans were super excited about it. He was super excited about it. But he's said publicly before, during the 2021 season in a Players Tribune article that like signing the big contract that he signed to come to the Knicks at first was like put a lot of pressure on him and made him feel like he had to do more than maybe he was capable of or whatever, and he overexerted himself and over tried to be like the man. And I think that same thing sort of happened this past year, except for he also just seemed outwardly unhappy with not being like the high usage guy. And so if you get a Donovan Mitchell, who's never been anything but the high usage guy since literally his rookie year, you have Jalen Brunson, who's coming to this team wanting to find a bigger role for himself. You have RJ Barrett, who was sort of burgeoning into a bigger role last year, which was part of what seemed to annoy Randle on the court. You're putting yourself in a weird situation there where like, I feel like Randle might sort of be the odd man out that's making things not work as well for the whole team. As far as the other 3, I could see them playing well with each other. I mean, one nice thing with Brunson and RJ is that they sort of have come up in environments where they haven't had to be on ball creators to be good. So like Brunson has played off Luka Doncic before. RJ has played off Julius Randle and stuff before. And, that's been situations that they've been in and succeeded in. So we'll see how it all goes. If I was going to put like a wins cap on it, I don't know. It could work out at its best to like 50 wins or something. It could work out at its or maybe even slightly more than that, like a magical season like what the Knicks had the one year in the Carmelo Anthony years. Or it could work out like this past year. I think I'd probably floor it at like, I don't know, 37 wins roughly, like what they got this year, and missing the playoffs, which would honestly, after making that sort of money investment and trade investment, would be a huge disappointment, obviously.
Will Donovan Mitchell be the newest New York Knick? Will Leon Rose potentially come out on top of any potential deal struck with the Utah Jazz? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Knicks. Alex, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Always a pleasure to come by, Jackson. Thanks for having me on, man.